Welcome along. This session takes place as part of our Automotive World's Future Mobility Europe conference. This is an event we'd normally love to bring to you in person. However, due to ongoing COVID restrictions in the region, we have chosen this year to bring the event online. This is day 2 of 2. You can find more details on other sessions at futuremobilityeurope.automotiveworld.com. Finally, a big thank you to our sponsors, DMI, Synopsys, and DLH Bulls. My name is Xavier Bouchra, Special Correspondent at Automotive World, and I'll be your moderator for this deep dive, which will focus on electric vehicle battery technology. We're shortly going to hear from Doron Myersdorf, Chief Executive and Co-founder of StoreDot, a lithium-ion battery and fast charging developer. This is a 30-minute session, which, time permitting, will be followed by a Q&A session. If you have a question, please type it into the box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Slides and a recording of this event will be made available later in the week. And with that, I'll hand over to today's expert. Doron, the floor is all yours.
Okay, so we'll talk about electric vehicle battery technology today with a deep dive into some of the exciting things that are happening in the marketplace. So we'll talk about the mission that we see, the market, and then some deep dive into the technology and the industry roadmap. So we are about solving the range anxiety, which is the #1 barrier for adoption of electric vehicles. And, you know, if we look at the last 10 years, we've been focusing on getting the right ecosystem partners like BP, Samsung, TDK, EV Energy, and Daimler that are working with us on taking this technology of fast charging, extreme fast charging, and later on extreme energy density to the market. So as I mentioned, the one obstacle that are actually two is the range anxiety, when you're actually if you're in fear that you would not reach your destination, or the charging anxiety where actually you reach the charging station but there are not enough outlets out there, or that there is a problem of a long line of people ahead of you. So we are focused on the battery technology, but many other things need to happen in the ecosystem in order for this to work. So we are working with Daimler on the design of the vehicle, and we are working with BP and ChargeMaster on the design of the infrastructure. But what is the missing piece on the technology side is a battery that is safe and that can fast charge really in 5 or 10 minutes to give you the full charge of the vehicle. So really what we can track in order to see if we are succeeding to provide the driver the best experience is the miles per minute. So if you have 5 minutes, you can have 100 miles. If you have 10 minutes, maybe 200 miles. This is something that everybody can relate to and can really understand. And also what is important is the total range, of course, in a single charge, which is 300 or 400 miles. So in order to reach real adoption and satisfaction of the drivers, we need to improve the energy density, and this is really critical in order to make it happen. So the existing battery technology is not sufficient in order to support the mass adoption of electric vehicles. We are looking at a very large market that is driven first by the regulations. So the regulations, we look at what's happening in Europe and what's happening in China and Japan and South Korea. These are the governments that are really pushing the regulations, so the adoption of electric vehicle is a must. And it is happening whether the EV OEMs support it or not, which by the way they are, but this is part of the driving force, is what is actually happening in terms of letting vehicles into the main cities in Europe, let's say Berlin or Paris or London, that after 2040 and in Sweden 2030, you cannot really buy any gasoline vehicles. Even hybrid vehicles will not be available. So we are looking at a mega revolution that is creating a huge market. We're looking at a north of 100 billion market by 2030, just for the batteries that are related to this transition. And this aligns very nicely with the drop in the price of the batteries that is coming down. And you know, in 2018 it was $94 per kilowatt hour cell level, and now it's even less. But let's not forget that we started only 10, 12 years ago. We were at $1,000, so 10 times per kilowatt hour. So, and this is the reason why mass adoption is already at the beginning of the hockey stick for electric vehicles. So even if we only look at the available market for extreme fast charge, which is maybe only the high end of the market, we are still looking at $30 billion market, 31.4 in 2030. When I say extreme fast charge, I mean greater than 5C. 5C means 12 minutes. 60 divided by 5 is 12 minutes full charge of the vehicle. This is considered real fast charging, what we call extreme fast charging. So what is the technology that is actually needed in order to make this happen? We are looking at 0 to 80% that is capable of being charged in 10 minutes or under 10 minutes. And this is the charge that we see here, the state of charge, 80% in about 9 minutes. And this is the curve of the state of charge as time progresses. So this is our goal. This is an ideal situation. And this is actually one of our prototype cells that is 30 amp hour, designed for EV form factor with a 622 NMC cathode. By the way, we are already at the 811, but this one is more, I'd say, stable. And this one has an energy density in fast charging of 240 watt hour per kilogram, which enables us to basically claim the 50% improvement in charging time compared to any other solution in the market. So how do we actually achieve that? This can be very clear on this chart. This chart here on the left side, what you see is a conventional lithium-ion cell with a thickness of both the anode and the cathode that are really significant. What can actually happen when you replace the graphite, which is the orange one, when you replace it with silicon, the energy density is much, much higher, and therefore you can reduce the thickness of the anode to roughly, let's say, 10 or even 7 micron. And when you combine it with an 811 NMC cathode, you're basically getting to a much more efficient cell. And this is the value proposition of silicon in general when it replaces graphite, is first of all, much higher energy density. But for us, what is mostly important is the fast diffusion of the ions and the coefficient of the transition of the ions into the anode as you fast charge the cell. So basically, the idea is to eliminate the range anxiety, right? And we do it first with the silicon-based XFC, extreme fast charge approach, where we are basically providing 5 minutes for 100 miles. But this is only a stepping stone on our way to the solid state, or what we call extreme energy density. Extreme energy density approach allows you to actually reach 450 plus watt hour per kilogram. And that would enable, but this is a 2028 solution. This will enable 5 minutes charging for 200 miles, which is very significant in terms of the experience of the driver. So basically, we are, over the next decade, we will provide a solution that transitions from using silicon in the anode first to enable the 5 minutes for 100 miles, and then transitioning it to solid state, which will double this capability and enable 5 minutes for 200 miles. When we start to implement the extreme fast charge solution, and as we work with our partners such as Daimler, we see challenges and considerations as we move to the implementation. So when you use silicon, you can get much higher energy, and this is at the bottom here. On the atomic scale, basically you get much more energy because the lithium can connect much better to the silicon, and you can get 4 atoms of lithium connecting to 1 atom of silicon as opposed to 6 carbon atoms that connect to 1 lithium atom. So the energy is much higher on the atomic scale, but as we start to implement it and we need the nanoparticles for the higher surface area, and we need to integrate it into the cell level that can have the capacity phase or fade or the impedance rise and issues with the current. When we reach the pack level here on the top, we basically see the variation in different cells come into play. We see the gradient of the thermal issues really becoming significant. We need to balance the cells. And then, of course, you know, the most important thing is safety, first on the pack level and then safety at the system level. These are really major challenges in taking this technology to the market. And then at the end of the day, you need all the ecosystem partners on the charging side, on the grid, the smart grid, whether you're doing slow charging at home using AC charging or you're doing the DC charging in the fast charging stations. All these need to be optimized in order to really enable the high power charging that is required. So here I'm going to a little bit deeper into what I explained earlier about the silicon and the graphite, and what is the motivation to take lithiated silicon and to replace the graphite in the anode. So first, let's look at the chart on the left here, where we basically see, you know, that silicon can reach 3,500 milliamp hour per gram, which is, you know, 5-6 times more than graphite, which is, let's say, 400 or 350 milliamp hour per gram. So the potential of the silicon is huge, and this is the reason. In a conventional graphite anode, it takes 6 carbon atoms to hold 1 lithium atom. And in a silicon anode, 1 silicon atom can hold 4 lithium atoms. So this gives you this huge gap in the ability to achieve the energy density. What is also important is the potential window for the silicon. And the silicon is very similar to graphite when it comes to the potential voltage versus lithium, which is different for germanium, which was our first generation, or tin, which we originally combined with the silicon, or titanium oxide, or any other solutions that require different voltages, and therefore the entire configuration of the cell needs to be different, and therefore the BMS and the connections and the voltage management, all that is becoming also a challenge. So with silicon, actually, you get very similar characteristic as graphite in terms of a potential window. So we take 4 strategies in order to deal with the challenges of the silicon, which is the challenges is that it expands, right? I mean, every time you charge, it's becoming like a balloon, bigger, and every time you discharge, it's coming back to be smaller. So it inflates and deflates many times, and this is why, you know, eventually you lose power and get new areas of SEI layer being exposed. So we take 4 strategies: the electrolyte design with proprietary additives, and then the binder design. These are organic binders that hold the silicon in place. This is basically the matrix that holds the silicon in its structure. We are doping the material, we are alloying and coating the nanoparticles to make sure they have better structure. And of course, the optimization of the particle size, the current collector treatment, all these need to happen in order to deal with the fractures, the loss of contact, and the unstable SEI layer that is happening with silicon that does not happen typically with graphite. As we move to the extreme energy density, there are considerations that we need to make sure that we keep allowing the fast charging capability. Because if we provide much higher energy density but without fast charging, then the experience of the driver, again, in terms of miles per minute, is not being improved. So this is why we believe in hybrid solutions that do not have the four interfaces of, anode to solid, solid to solid, then back to the cathode through the separator. So four interfaces of solid to solid ion transfer in a traditional solid state. This is a major problem. And this is why we are considering using a hybrid solution where you still have some liquid electrolyte, but you separate it, and there's a catholyte and an anolyte that enable you to really optimize the system with the solid state separator. So the whole system does not have the solid to solid ion transition, which creates a lot of heat and also safety concerns. So this is really what we are working on currently. Because in a transitional solid state concept, also the cost is becoming an issue. The safety of lithium metal is unknown. The conductivity is low with the solid to solid contact. There's limited cycle life. The temperature is limited. The volume expansions are difficult to manage. So there are a lot of issues that have not still not been addressed by some of the solution providers for solid state, which really worries me that the timeline for mass adoption of solid state is not in the next few years, but it will take 5, 7, and even 10 years for real adoption of solid state. So this summarizes here the risk mitigation that we are taking with the hybrid approach, where basically there is an anode with the lithium metal with the gel electrolyte. Then you have the solid state electrolyte, and then you have the cathode with the gel electrolyte. So basically this eliminates the problem of the solid to solid transition of the ions in a traditional solid state cell. Also, when we look at the challenges to take solid state to mass adoption, we show here the changes in the process and the equipment that is needed, and all these orange ones are new steps that are needed in order to enable a new flow of a solid state solution. So these challenges must be addressed as we start to move to post-lithium technologies, because the investment in the existing facilities is in the tens or even $100 billion that is currently going into the capital equipment of traditional manufacturing lines, and we need to make sure that they are adequate also for the transition into solid state processes. So we look at the entire map of competition, and we see many players. Some of them are startups, some of them are OEMs, material providers, IP providers. Some are only using the BMS for the fast charging. And then there's a bunch of startups doing solid state. StoreDot is actually doing both the solid state for the long term, but focused currently on the extreme fast charge solution that is based on silicon, as I explained earlier. So this summarizes the range anxiety that is going from the ability to provide 20 miles per minute with a total range of 400 miles in 2024 to 25 plus miles per minute with a solid state hybrid solution with a total of 500 range total. This is our roadmap, which is aligned, by the way, with the DOE targets for extreme fast charging over the coming decade. And then finally, looking at the worldwide efforts, and you see that there is much work being done both in the USA Battery 500 and in the Japan Rising initiative. Everybody is targeting much higher energy densities towards the end of the decade, looking between 400 to 500 watt-hour per kilogram. And this is a roadmap that we are also aligning with. China, by the way, is ahead of the game. They are already at the 300 watt-hour per kilogram, let's say by CATL, Gaussian, Lysian, and CALB. They are all providing already 300 watt-hour per kilogram, not in extreme fast charge like we do, but they do have the energy density that is aligned with this roadmap. So the industry will move on this line, reaching the 450, I believe, by the mid of the decade. And this is where I think all the industry should align its efforts to make sure that this is how we deliver on the promise of the transition to full electrification of the entire fleet by, let's say, 2035. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Doron. Thank you for that presentation. Really interesting stuff. So given the late session start time, yes, we'll take 5 minutes for a Q&A. If you do have a question, please use the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. I'll start then, Doron. So let me ask you, if we think about extreme fast charging applications, what are some of the settings we're likely to see this in? So I can think of one, off-highway charging, but do you see any other, suitable settings or applications, opportunities?
So yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at where the industry is going and the work that we do with Daimler, you see already implementations such as with the Charge Master or in Aral in Germany. So the setting of providing the infrastructure and the vehicle that can fast charge together with the requirement of the grid, these settings are already available, and we already see some implementation in the marketplace for the entire demonstration of the ecosystem.
Sure. You mentioned infrastructure, so presumably that's a challenge that's on your mind. How can StoreDot assist in this, and with things like grid management? Presumably things like smart charging technologies and V2G will come into play.
So we are a small startup. We're only 120 people, so we cannot take care of all the ecosystem problems. But this is why we have this great group of strategic investors. So in the case of BP, British Petroleum, that they own Charge Master, that actually is leading the way in terms of designing the fast charging 350 plus kilowatt stations. And then, of course, as you deploy and you need to transition the entire forecourts, let's say 18,500 forecourts of BP that need to transition from being gas stations to charging stations. Of course, the smart grid needs to be designed around the infrastructure that is needed for each of these forecourts. But we are only providing, the data that is required for these chargers, but not the optimization of the grid itself.
Yes, of course. That's great. So I can see plenty of questions have come in now. I'm gonna start with this one. So if we consider extreme fast charging, what are the considerations around battery life reduction, or damage to the battery?
Yeah, so definitely battery life is a major concern, and especially as we go to silicon. Silicon has issues, like I've mentioned, of the expansion of the batteries. So what we are trying to do is actually to find the optimal cell structure that will allow at least 1,000 cycles. 1,000 cycles is and if each cycle, each charge gives you 300 miles, so we're looking at a warranty of 300,000 miles for the vehicle, for the battery of the vehicle, which is typically sufficient for the OEMs. But this is an uphill battle. We are not there yet. We are only showing a few hundred cycles today, and it will take another 2 years or so to allow extreme fast charging with 1,000 cycles of charge-discharge.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Let's see here. So can you tell us, I'll take this question. It asks, as for extreme energy density, how do you accommodate extreme volume change of cell structure fixing in a module structure? Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense, because it's a very good question, because the lithium metal actually expands as you insert the ions. You need to apply the optimal pressure on the cell to make sure that this expansion is being controlled. So you need to leave some space between the different cells, and these are now typically larger cells. We are looking at maybe 100 amp hour cells. So you don't have thousands of them. You only have a couple of hundred of them in the vehicle, and you leave some space between them for the expansion. But then, as this space is being consumed with the expansion, the pressure that is designed for the cell and for the entire pack comes into play. So it's a design that is, and you can see it also here in this chart. It is a design that looks at each of these modules, how much it can expand and how much pressure is going to be implemented inside the overall structure of the pack. So this is why the technology does not end with the chemistry of the cell, but it ends with the design of the pack, its cooling, its wiring, the connectors, in the charging station. Everything needs to actually work together seamlessly.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. We've had a comment coming here which says it would be preferable to avoid, the heavy use of lithium, given it's a scarce material or a conflict material, as written here. The same applies for SN. Perhaps you can talk about that a little bit. I mean, today it seems like what you're saying is lithium will remain the dominant technology, the dominant material in battery technology moving forward.
Yes, hopefully there will be post-lithium solutions that do not require lithium, but we've experimented with many materials, and there's a finite table of elements that you can play with, and lithium is actually the most efficient, the lightest material, and yes, it is a problem for the planet, but we had a much bigger problem with cobalt. And the industry took, over the last decade, a very serious effort to move from 111 to 622 to 811. So cobalt is gradually being eliminated. This was actually, I think, a major problem, maybe even bigger than lithium because of child labor in Congo and in some other places. So I think, as the industry will take on the challenge of using less lithium, over the next decade or so, there will be other alternatives. But right now, lithium is the most efficient and best way to really store energy through the ions of the lithium.
Thank you for that, Doron. This next question asks, can you give us an idea of the cost impact in terms of kilowatt hour energy to PEVs due to extreme fast charging? And do you have a target cost in terms of kilowatt per hour?
Yes, our target cost for 2024 is $80 per kilowatt hour. There might be cheaper solution there, and this goes to the first part of the question, that would maybe be closer to $75 per kilowatt hour, cell level. I'm only talking cell level right now. So there is some premium, maybe 5 to 10% premium for extreme fast charging. And this is why first we design it for the more exclusive cars, let's say the C and D models and not the A and B smaller cars. But this will be a differentiator for many EV OEMs that would be able to fully charge in 10 minutes.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Doron. And I'll make this the last question of the session then. It asks, in addition to what you've talked about today, are there any efforts done in terms of lightweighting of the battery module or pack that you'd like to tell us about? So
as you increase the cell size, there are more challenges in terms of heat. So heat dissipation becomes the #1 problem with fast charging as you increase the cell size. And this is why, we are dealing today with 30 amp hour cells, but the OEMs are actually pushing to be closer, as I mentioned, to 100 amp hour cells, which is a major challenge in terms of heat dissipation and cooling in general. So we are trying to find the middle ground and what is the optimal cell size that would actually be sufficient for the optimization of the vehicle operation on one hand, but also be safe in terms of heat dissipation on the other hand.
Wonderful, thank you for that. And with that, I'll bring today's session to a close. Apologies to anyone whose question we didn't reach today. However, you can reach out to Doron and StoreDot directly using the contact details on your screen. All that remains to say is thank you very much, Doron, for your presentation today.
Thank you, everybody.
And thank you again to StoreDot for helping to make this event possible, along with our Future Mobility Europe sponsors DMI, Synopsys, and DLH Bulls. Please remember, if you'd like to see more details on our Future Mobility Europe conference, which takes place today, you can visit futuremobilityeurope.automotiveworld.com. Our next session is a live Q&A with Julia Fier, Head of Strategy, Electrified Powertrain Technology at CF. That begins at 12:15 CEST. Slides and a recording of this event will be made available later in this week. Many thanks to everyone who's attended.